I hope I've convinced you, in the unlikely event that you needed convincing, that it's really important to understand your customers. So let's dig a little deeper and answer the next question. How do we describe consumers? What are some of the dimensions that are useful to slice up the larger pie? Because after all, not everyone is the same, and so we have to really think about what are the meaningful dimensions that we might use to differentiate among different customer groups. To do that, we rely upon the tried and true philosophy that is known as market segmentation, probably a concept that you are familiar with. And the underlying logic is that, again, we can't be all things to all people, so we want to pick our shot and tailor our offering to one or more market segments whose needs we can most easily satisfy. The easiest and most widely used way to segment a market is in terms of demographics. Demographics simply refer to the observable aspects of a population, characteristics of your customers that are fairly easy to describe and to observe. One of these is age. We know that people of different ages obviously are quite different from one another. That becomes more apparent every year that you get older. The products and services that might appeal to millennials, for example, probably aren't going to be very attractive to older people, and certainly that's the case vice versa. One of the interesting things about age groups, and especially younger consumers, is that people today, students and millennials, people who are in their teens or younger, are what we refer to as digital natives. They have always lived in a world where they are online. To them, it is perfectly natural to be going online, offline, all day long, and in fact to be engaged with multiple devices at any one time. And it's obvious whenever you walk down the street and see young people walking around with their heads buried in their phones. Digital natives represent new challenges and opportunities for us, and anybody with teenagers knows what a big challenge this can be. And certainly as a college professor, I face this challenge every day, trying to get digital natives to actually listen to what I'm saying in the front of the class. Think about this statistic, for example. The average U.S. teenager spends over 9 hours a day looking at a screen. Another very important characteristic is gender. Males and females are different. As we know, some are from Venus and some are from Mars, and they're quite different from one another in many ways. A lot of our strategies have to tailor our approach to one or the other. Family structure is something that marketers think a lot about as well. An individual who is a certain age, has a certain income, but who has a family, for example, maybe with kids running around the house, is obviously a very different consumer than that same person who lives alone. Need to divide our market in terms of how many kids are living at home, are there any kids at all, is the family young or old, etc. Social class and income, clearly very important. We hear a lot of talk these days about income inequality, and that's a problem that, of course, manifests itself in the marketing world as well, because clearly people in different social classes not only have different income levels, but their tastes and preferences are quite different from one another. You actually can have two consumers who make the identical income, but because of other characteristics like level of education, occupation, and so on, they really are two entirely different people. Race and ethnicity, we hear about the growing diversity of the U.S. population. This is something that is of profound importance to many marketers, especially those who still haven't quite figured out that the ethnic and racial composition of their customer base is quite different than it was even 10 years ago, and 10 years into the future it's going to be different still. Geography. Where do you live? What type of region do you live in? Do you live in an urban area, a rural area? Do you live in the southern part of the U.S. or the north? But then we turn to psychographics, and this is where things get a little more interesting and a little more complicated. Psychographics refers to aspects of the population that are not immediately apparent, that lie beneath the surface, psychological characteristics of consumers, their beliefs, their attitudes, their values, the things that keep them up at night, the things that they love to think about, the things that they love to do, their political orientations, their religious activities, the way they spend their leisure time. You can have two demographically identical consumers and find that they are enormously different from each other because of the way they choose to express themselves, their values and beliefs, etc. And that's why simple demographic segmentation often is a valuable first step, but usually not sufficient to truly understand what goes on inside the mind of your customer. One psychographic dimension is personality. We all have different personality traits. One obvious example is how extroverted people are. Some people are very outgoing. They love to really be a presence in the room, so to speak. If you're in sales, you're probably an extroverted person because introverted people don't really like making cold calls and talking to people they don't know. Traits like extroversion and introversion and many others often show up in terms of our preferences for different products. Our attitudes about various beliefs and behaviors, everything from smoking to politics, result in enormous distinctions in terms of our preferences for different brands. Our activities, how do we spend our leisure time? Are we active or passive? Do we have hobbies that take up a lot of our time and attention and money? And also, of course, our behavior. As we like to say, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. Understanding how your customers behave is extremely important for segmentation strategies, and in particular, the need to identify your heavy user. I can't stress how important that is. Your heavy user, that is, you're not necessarily in terms of weight, although that may be true for fast food heavy users, I guess, but in terms of the frequency with which they purchase your product. We talk in marketing about the 80-20 rule, which tells us that approximately 80% of your revenues are accounted for by 20% of your customers. Ratio itself doesn't matter so much as the recognition that your heavy user, someone who buys your product very frequently, is likely to be quite different in a lot of ways than your more casual user. It's quiz time. Let's have a quick quiz just to make sure that you've been paying attention and not reading a magazine or something while you've been listening to this little video. So here's an easy question for you. According to this merchant, the women who buy my apparel products tell me they want clothing that makes them feel confident in professional situations. The need to use products to bolster low self-esteem, as in this case, is an example of which? A demographic variable, a psychographic variable, or a behavioral variable. Make your choice, A, B, or C. If you chose B, psychographic variable, you just won 100 bonus points.